Something is living inside your brain right now. Not a metaphor, not a thought experiment. A living organism, microscopic, invisible, possibly nestled inside your amygdala at this very second. And here is the part that should make you set everything else down. It might be changing who you are. You have probably never heard of Toxoplasma gondii. Most people haven't. It doesn't make the evening news. It doesn't come with symptoms you would recognize. It doesn't announce itself. But scientists who study it describe it as one of the most sophisticated biological hijackers ever discovered, and a growing body of research suggests that this parasite, invisible, ancient, nearly universal, may have been quietly reshaping human behavior for thousands of years. This is not science fiction. This is real. But to understand what it does to you, you need to first understand what it does to a rat. Picture a rat in a dark corner of a warehouse. The rat is small, it is quick, and it has spent its entire evolutionary history developing one particular superpower, a deep, instinctive, absolute terror of cats. The smell of cat urine triggers a panic response so embedded in the rat's nervous system that it doesn't require a single conscious thought. The smell arrives, the body reacts, the legs move. That fear has kept rats alive for millions of years. It is one of the most reliable survival mechanisms in the animal kingdom. Now picture that same rat after it has been infected with Toxoplasma gondii. On the surface, nothing looks wrong. The rat still moves. It still eats. It still interacts with other rats. It behaves like a rat in almost every way you could observe from the outside. But when it encounters the smell of cat urine, something changes. It doesn't run. It doesn't freeze. In controlled experiments, infected rats have been observed moving toward the scent, lingering near it. In some cases, appearing actively drawn to it, to the one smell that evolution spent millions of years teaching them to flee. Robert Sapolsky, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, has spent years studying this phenomenon in forensic detail. What he found underneath the behavior is even stranger than the behavior itself. Toxoplasma doesn't simply suppress the rat's fear. It doesn't knock out the alarm system and leave a blank space. It does something more surgical than that. The parasite appears to rewire the neural circuits in the rat's brain so that the pathways normally activated by fear and avoidance become cross-connected to the circuits that govern sexual attraction and curiosity. The rat isn't unafraid of the cat. The rat is, in some measurable biological sense, attracted to it. And so it moves toward the predator. The cat kills it. The parasite, inside the cat's gut, completes the only stage of its reproductive cycle that matters. This is not a side effect. This is the plan. Toxoplasma gondii can only sexually reproduce inside the intestinal lining of a feline. It needs to get there. So over millions of years of evolutionary pressure, it developed the ability to reach into the limbic system of a rodent and redirect one of the most powerful survival instincts in mammalian biology, not by destroying it, by inverting it. And then, at some point in the long history of this parasite, it found its way into a different kind of mammal. Toxoplasma gondii currently infects an estimated 1/3 of the world's entire human population. That is roughly 2.5 billion people. Depending on where you live, the rate in your country could be higher or lower. Infection rates range from under 10% in some parts of East Asia to over 50% in parts of Europe, South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. You probably know people who carry it. You may carry it yourself. The most common routes of infection are contact with cat feces during activities like gardening or cleaning a litter box, consuming undercooked meat that contains the parasite cysts, or being born with it when a mother carries an active infection during pregnancy. In most healthy adults, the initial infection produces no recognizable symptoms at all. Your immune system detects the parasite, mounts a response, and contains the threat. You feel no fever, no fatigue, nothing. A blood test would show antibodies, the biological record that something was there and was fought off. But if your doctor never thought to order that test, you would have no idea. The parasite doesn't leave, though. It retreats. It forms tiny, durable protective cysts in your muscle tissue and, crucially, in your brain tissue, particularly in areas involved in emotion, fear, and decision-making. And it waits, for years, possibly for the rest of your life. In a healthy immune system, those cysts are effectively dormant. They sit there, generation after generation, doing what appears to be nothing. For decades, the medical consensus was that this chronic, dormant infection was clinically irrelevant in healthy adults. The parasite was contained. The cysts were quiet. There was nothing to treat and nothing to worry about. Then Jaroslav Flegr started paying attention. Flegr is an evolutionary biologist at Charles University in Prague. In the early 1990s, he was examining personality data and stumbled across something he initially found difficult to explain. People who tested positive for Toxoplasma antibodies were showing statistically consistent differences in personality profiles compared to people who tested negative. The differences were not dramatic. They were not the kind of changes that would alarm a friend or a spouse, but they were consistent, and consistency in data is its own kind of signal. Infected men, his research suggested, scored higher on measures of suspicion, novelty-seeking, and resistance to following rules. They also showed slower reaction times in tests designed to measure neural processing speed. Infected women showed a different pattern, scoring higher on warmth, outgoingness, and certain measures of social intelligence. The shifts moved in different directions depending on the sex of the host. That wasn't confusion in the data. Flegr argued it was exactly what you would expect to see if the parasite was interacting differently with male and female hormonal systems. He published his findings. The scientific community largely ignored them. That is understandable, in a way. The idea that a microscopic parasite could measurably alter the personality of a grown human being through cysts sitting passively in the brain sounded extraordinary. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But the evidence kept arriving. A series of studies in the Czech Republic in the late 1990s and early 2000s found something deeply unexpected. Individuals who tested positive for Toxoplasma infection were statistically more likely to be involved in traffic accidents. Infected drivers appeared to show significantly slower reaction times in testing, and when researchers controlled for age, alcohol use, fatigue, and every other variable they could identify, the association between infection and accident involvement held. The longer someone had been infected, the older the infection, the more pronounced the reaction time difference appeared to be. At high speeds, milliseconds determine survival. A parasite that slows your neural processing speed by even a fraction is not neutral. It is dangerous in ways you would never attribute to it, because you have no reason to think a dormant microscopic cyst is affecting your foot's response time on a brake pedal. But the research suggests it might be. And then there is the schizophrenia connection, which may be the most consequential finding of all. E. Fuller Torrey, a psychiatrist and schizophrenia researcher at the Stanley Medical Research Institute in Maryland, spent decades investigating one of the most persistent and troubling patterns in psychiatric epidemiology. Individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia are, across multiple studies and multiple countries, significantly more likely to test positive for Toxoplasma antibodies than matched control populations. The association doesn't disappear when researchers control for demographics, geography, or socioeconomic status. It holds in the United States. It holds in Europe. It holds in Brazil, in Ethiopia, in China. It appears consistently enough that Torrey and his colleagues have concluded that Toxoplasma infection is likely one of the environmental triggers that, acting on certain genetic vulnerabilities, contributes to the development of psychotic disorders. The biological mechanism behind this may involve dopamine. Toxoplasma gondii carries the genetic instructions for an enzyme called tyrosine hydroxylase, the same enzyme your brain uses to produce dopamine. In an infected brain, the parasite appears to stimulate increased dopamine production in specific regions. Excess dopamine activity in limbic circuits is one of the most robustly supported neurobiological mechanisms underlying psychotic symptoms. The antipsychotic medications used to treat schizophrenia work primarily by blocking dopamine receptors. A parasite that is quietly and chronically upregulating your dopamine system from inside brain tissue where it has been sitting for years is not doing nothing. It is doing something very specific. Here is where the picture becomes harder to dismiss. When you line up the behavioral changes Flegr documented and look at them through the lens of what this parasite actually needs to survive and spread, they stop looking like random statistical noise. A parasite that needs its mammalian host to approach cats needs the host to be less fearful and more risk-tolerant.